Welcome, everybody, to Prolific Pulse Press Podcast. This is your host, Lisa Tomey Zonneveld. Today, we're welcoming H. Lee Barnes to celebrate the publication of Emerald City Blues, a novel, and it is going to be coming out in October. So, welcome, Lee. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Lisa.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've been enjoying reading your book. I'm about halfway through. I actually got really compelled with it, and I went back and read some parts again. And I'm finding it absolutely fascinating because it touches on some very tender subjects. But before we get into all that, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? And just give us a little tidbit about you.
All right. An interesting thing. I was born in Moscow, Idaho, never lived there. And the best thing I can say about being from somewhere is the longest I lived as a teen, and I was in my teenage years, was in El Paso, Texas. So I attended high school in the first year of college there. Prior to that, my stepfather and my mother were pretty much gypsy types, chasing different one at a period of time. He was in the military, and then after that, we chased his jobs as a radio and later television announcer, doing primarily the news. So I lived all over. That's the answer. I'm from nowhere, or I'm from everywhere, mostly the West.
It sounds like you've had a very interesting, very busy life.
Yeah, I had a wonderful life for 3 years in Puerto Rico as a child because it certainly introduced me to a different world other than the world that my parents living in Montana and California and Washington had introduced me to.
And I understand, if I'm correct, you're a Vietnam veteran?
Yes.
It certainly goes back to my era. Yeah.
Same thing, same period. Yes, I was in United States Army, and I was in Special Forces, commonly called a Green Beret. I wrote a memoir published with the University of Nebraska Press about my year there in Vietnam as a member of Special Forces on an A camp. It's quite different than all the ones that have been published about all the great special units that did all these different things. I wanted to capture what it was like to just work, and have friends, and a lot of it's about loss. I saw a lot of death there, and you don't shake memories of death, especially when you see two women lying atop a dead Vietnamese soldier that was either a husband or a son, or probably one of each. And you hear those mournful cries. And
Yes.
that's the image that will never, ever leave me. And I wrote a poem about it, and I wrote about it in the memoir too.
Wow, that sounds like an interesting memoir. And what is the name of that?
When we walked above the clouds.
When we walked above the clouds. I have to check that out. That sounds very interesting. I actually read a lot of books about the Vietnam era, and I find it very interesting. Having been a child of, well, I guess I was actually more toward an adult at that time, and having family over there, it mattered a lot to me about what was going on and the subsequent, events that happened after that. So, well, thank you for serving our country and for sharing your experience with others. It can't always be easy to write about those things, but it's important, I think, too, for people to understand those experiences that other people have.
Yes, I think what makes mine a little bit different than others is in my mind, I was writing it for the guys I served with,
Mhm.
even the ones that I lost, more than for a broad general audience. And of course, by the time I got that finished, the major publishing houses had been saturated with Vietnam stuff, and really they were looking more for fiction and that addressed the war, and they wanted stuff that they could popularize out there in the marketplace.
Mhm. I'm just the opposite. I like to read the memoirs because I feel like you get the full story, more of the truth of what's happened. And so I guess I'm on the other side of the fence. But Emerald City Blues, it has fact, it has fiction, it has a great blend, I think, of what was going on at that time in the winter of 1943. Tell us about this book.
Well, Emerald City Blues, I actually wrote the first draft of this more than 20 years ago, probably close to 25 years ago. And I set it aside because I was working on other projects and teaching and finishing up graduate school. Or I'd already finished up graduate school, but I was getting into full-time teaching. And anyhow, the long and the short of it is that I have a love affair with the blues in a way. I'm not musically inclined myself. In fact, I can turn off the water just by singing when I'm in the shower. It just goes off automatically. But going back to singers like Lightning Hopkins and Muddy Waters and those great blues singers, I've had an interest in their music and what compels them to be, because there's so much honesty in the blues.
Yes.
And it's even though they call it the blues and everything, the real deep blues is really about longing and loss. But it's not romantic longing and loss. It's reflective longing and loss, which is, in my mind, a little bit more powerful. And so when I came up with the character Hard Times, HT, as a blues singer, and of course I had to give him a background in a lot of different ways. I wanted him because he was born and reared or at least reared in Southern California prior to the war, of course, the World War II. He didn't really have the same blues experience that the others did. And his music is a longing for that, to capture that, because he thinks that whether consciously or subconsciously, I've had it, that his world really existed in the South and in suffering the way that cotton field workers did in the heat of the sun, and sharing their lives together through music. And of course, being a white man and a mature white man, when I started writing it, there's a lot of people who might look at it and say, "Oh, you're stealing culture." Well, this was long before that stealing culture came about. It was, I was captured by, in a way, the soul of that culture that created the original blues, and then of course that translated to the New Orleans sound later on. And one of my all-time favorites in musicians is one of the greats of the New Orleans sound. And I don't know how much further to go on that. The rest of the book, of course, is, as I dedicated it to the women who worked so diligently during World War II and on behalf of the nation when the nation needed them most. They certainly came out. And I think that the other part is that because that's my mother's generation, I wanted to write a woman that was quite unlike my mother in most ways. You'd have to know my mother to appreciate what I'm saying. And so thus I created Eve, but I borrowed from my mother's background. and her family's background. And they were a family of secrets in a lot of ways. And the other part I borrowed was that I wanted Eve to be one of those that was abandoned by her father during the Depression, because there were a lot of men who left their families with maybe the best of intentions, seeking work and trying to pull them back to get, the family back together in one way or another. And it affected. I mean, there's stories in that family that were revealed to me later on, my mother's family, that I wanted to include, if you will, in the narrative in one way or another. And of course, people within a family create, out of the stories that are the family stories, they create myths. And then my mother would buy into the myths, and she'd exaggerate those into huge lies. So in this way, I wanted Eve to be unlike my mother in that she was the kind that probed her experience and the experiences of others around her, looking for the truth of it, to capture it in some way in journals and find something that embellished her life in a greater way, if that makes sense. Uh, and
Yes, and with Eve, for keeping the journal, and that kind of set her apart in a way, shows that she was really delving into some things, and that was her key.
yeah, and she's not yet at the beginning of this. She's not as introspective as she gets to be later on, because she gains new experiences. And of course, one of the themes that I work with in there is abortion,
Mhm.
because one of the lies my mother told me for years, and of course I created the Helen in there based off of the woman who was my Aunt Helen, who I never knew, of course, because she died of a backroom abortion in roughly 1941 and 1942. And so the revelation of that, I found out from my cousin Dolores, who was the only one in the family who apparently wouldn't, put blankets over lies, or anyhow, she would tell the truth if I asked her a question. Uh, I guess my mother kept saying, her sister Helen died in an automobile accident. And of course, that's what a family would do. They would lie about stuff like that in time, because what could be more shameful than abortion? But at the same time, abortion was a completely different thing then. It was not only shameful to the family, but it was dangerous to the woman who submitted herself to an abortion or subjected herself to it, uh, because they did die. And that's something that in this argument about abortion today, they keep making it about choice, and what they forget to bring out in their arguments is, of course, that it was also a danger. I mean, women had to hide in order to hide in the back and go away from their family in order to have an abortion. Uh, and a lot of midwives, non-medical people, performed them. So I put that as a theme in there, because any loss of life is a sad loss if it hasn't been a full life, and even more so, it's a tragedy when women have to go risk something just to save their reputation or their family's reputation, or to avoid supporting a child that they can't possibly afford.
Right. And with also the underlying theme, I think, was very strong, and I think this carries out through the book with the relationship with Eve and HT, and what that was, how that was unaccepted, and frowned upon in the storyline, and so true to what it would have been then. Um, Looked down upon to have interracial friendship. like that, and people made assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely part of it. What I can say is that going into my own background, the person that I knew in my youth, around the adolescent period of my life, uh, was in Puerto Rico, and her name was Agapito Ortiz Gonzalez, and she was a Black woman. And she was loving as a mother in so many ways that my mother wasn't. And so early in my life, I saw humanity, that kind of humanity in somebody who didn't really have to love me that way. Take me and hold me in her arms when she saw that I was sad, or sit down and have me sit down at the table while she was cooking and show me how to cook. And she put effort into me that I didn't get from my mother or stepfather. So I had that experience, and then later on, of course, in the military. And the odd thing, and that's what I wanted to explore here, is that it wasn't just Eve who was reluctant in moving forward with something with HG. It was also HT who saw his role quite a bit different. He saw himself not as one with the others, if you will, in full. And of course, he is, at least as a musician, he's got to be introspective. And then, of course, he's a reader too. So he would be reluctant, not just for him or for the judgments of others on him, but rather the judgments that would come to Eve, because he has a very protective soul about him. And I can certainly say with the Black soldiers I served with in special forces, that was akin to the way that they viewed themselves and their role as soldiers, and they saw themselves as protectors, as noble servers of a cause. And maybe I'm exaggerating it and everything, but I also had the experience in the military because I played sports in high school with Blacks. I never had any problem with joking around with them or having mild friendships. But there were belligerent, angry Black men in the service, and I had I think I had three serious fights in basic training and AI and advanced infantry training with Blacks. But I didn't let that cloud my judgment about people. And then later I developed, at the same time I had friendships going through basic training and advanced infantry training with Black soldiers. So there's a mix that you could it was only later, when I later became a cop and everything, that I saw the anger of Blacks, even when you made a legitimate stop on them, which was the case that I usually did. I can't think of one single stop that I made that was ill. Their reaction was one of two ways: to lower their eyes and be kind of subservient, or to be angry. And so I wanted to. That's why HT, if he appears to be complex, he reflects probably a lot of my own experience engaging Blacks over the years, Black men over the years, and two of my friends that I'm in constant contact with on Facebook and everything, of course, are one's a former basketball player for UNLV, and the other one is a former soldier. He was a Gulf War soldier, and we remain in touch, exchanging stuff, joking, and things like that. So HT and Eve are drawn, I would say, from my own personal experience in some ways.
Right. Like a composite.
Yeah, that I would. You picked That's a good one. Way of putting it.
So when you look at this, based back in 1943 and so on, and now you look at how we are in 2025, what relevance do you see this storyline of having in this time that we're in now?
Uh, well, a lot of it has to do with this is probably the most divided our nation has ever been. Uh, they were greatly divided prior to the war breaking out. I mean, there was, the Hoover era took them into, they blamed, that blame game that always happens with politics occurred then, and it carried over to uh, the start of the era that would have started World War II to 1941. But the nation under threat as a whole, probably at that time, unified this country and that generation in ways that we don't have now. We are a very divided nation along lines of uh, politics, culture, race, pick it. Uh, we're constantly being, these threads are woven into conversations, they're woven into, of course, the media and Facebook and you get it, you're bombarded with, you're either on our side or you're not on our side. And I'm not sure that that would have served the nation well during World War II if they'd been divided like that.
Yeah.
Um, so then the thing that we have to remember too is that the education system was quite a bit different for uh, those generations that played a role during World War II. Those people, they were everything that was taught in education then was fundamentals. They were preparing them for work in the workplace and for life as a working person, middle class, aimed towards middle class, if you will. And I think that education now has shifted considerably over the last. I mean, I saw it when I was teaching as a professor at the College of Southern Nevada. I saw the actual transition of the kind of questions that students would raise compared to when I first started teaching. They drifted, a lot of them wanted to drift toward whatever was current on the internet, whatever was driving politics, that kind of thing. So my admiration, and I admit that I have one for my mother's generation and everything, is that they grew up under arduous circumstances because of the Depression, but they grew up educated in the sense that they were prepared to go out in the world and work. And when the nation called upon them, they did. And I think those women that stepped up, especially in the war industry or in the military during World War II, can be likened to any of the heroics that the men performed, by which I mean there's a degree of heroism that takes place in the battlefield that can't be matched anywhere else. But the whole idea of doing the work, doing it the honorable way, is important. But they were also, because of that, a generation that was breaking from tradition. Here they were without, in many cases, without men around to marry or whatever, if you believe in the heterosexual life, earning their own way, doing something that was important to the world or to their nation and in the world as a whole, because this nation played such a role in World War II. and finding out that they could be independent, that they didn't. I mean, I think Eve kind of represents that. There's two things going on with her. She wanted that adventure, and she had a naive notion of it, what that adventure was going to be. And when she got there, she found out that that adventure was really about interaction with others and growth through that process and seeing the world in a different way. And of course, the feminist movement had existed before World War II, long before World War II. I mean, they fought for the right to vote and everything else, but I don't think it really took hold in the emotional sense in large numbers that took place in World War II. Suddenly, they wanted independence, even if they were going to be married and have families. They wanted independence, and they were prepared to step forward at the end of the World War and go back in part to the family unit. You know, we know about what happened in the 50s and everything, but I think that they made a great impression on the daughters they had,
Yeah.
because that's when the feminist movement really took place, was in the late 50s through the 70s. That generation, that baby boomer generation of women that stepped out, and we don't even need the family. We don't. We can do it all on our own if you'll get out of the way. And I think Eve. They finish the book hopefully in a way that Eve sees that for herself.
I think that I was recalling back as my own child. My father was a career Air Force and first Navy, and then he went in the Air Force. And he what I noticed because of um, that period of time and him being away, and women learn to lean on one another and be there for one another, and they develop that closeness. And that has evolved right on into the current day that, you still have your group, your supportive group of women, when they call your girlfriend group or whatever nowadays. But the influence and the support for one another, no matter what, coming from that cohesive group. And that's something that goes way back, like you were talking, goes way back, and to develop that unity and for a common cause, and also just to support one another. And military, when your spouse is gone, and for sometimes long periods of time, you develop your supportive group, and it's what keeps it together, keeps you together for things. And so that came through in this book, with the women coming together and developing a kind of a supportive system, and looking out for one another, going to look at apartments together, and that to make sure that everybody was going to be safe. And I like that portrayal in your book.
Yeah, I felt that was very important for Eve also to develop as a character,
Mhm.
and
Exactly.
to show her kind of strength. And in fact, when she takes Dominic and pretty much intimidates her into coming out of the
Mhm.
window, getting out on the fire escape with the others. That's a small act of courage, because she's standing up for one person who's deserving
Yeah,
against the group that has already judged her without knowing her. And
exactly.
and so she brings them out, and the group quickly accepts. I mean, one of the things is and the fire escape is very important in the book. Um, because it's the, what happens on the fire escape becomes the final bond for the group, and shows how powerful they can be when working together. When the strongest in the weakest in the group show themselves in a certain way, and shows how the group can give strength to the weakest in it without weakening the strongest. It just it's I agree with you about women. I was in the casino business for quite a while with women dealers, and I listened to them, and I saw how they formed their groups and who belonged and who didn't. And I think sometimes that I would look at them and I think, well, what happens if you guys get into a situation where you really need somebody that's not in your group? How would you react to that person? And that's anyhow. The book I think spirits that kind of feeling among women forward, and hopefully in a way that engages the audience as well.
Lee, what are your plans next after this? Are you going to do some talks at different places with your book?
Yeah, I'll be doing an initial offering of the book at a bookstore in Las Vegas called the Writer's Block, if you can believe that,
Oh,
on Fremont. And I don't know where we'll go from there. I'm going to be doing more interviews with bloggers such as yourself along the way. But I have another writing project going at the same time, and then I have that book of poetry coming out in about a year, and that's the title of it is At the VA, and those poems capture. I think I mentioned it before. Soldiers in different cast in different roles in war, and then as participants in group therapy at the VA, and people soldiers, and some of them female as well, who go to the VA for help for injuries related to their service. So I'm not sure that, even though I've written a book of poetry about it, I wrote a collection of short stories, Minimal Damage, that dealt in a couple of cases with soldiers who came back and making the adjustment to civilian life. And some of the poems, of course, are touching on that too.
Sounds interesting.
Well, it doesn't go away, especially if you've ever sat in one of their sessions.
Right. My niece is a counselor for veterans in Iowa State. Yeah.
Wonderful. She's got some stories, I'm sure.
Yeah, she's very dedicated. She's become a specialist with the substance abuse aspect of it, and so yeah, she loves her work. She's also a military wife, and certainly knows about camaraderie with groups of women, how you support one another. She was one of the they call the woman that other women go to for help when you go into a new key spouse. She was a key spouse, and for a number of years. So yeah, so small world that we have.
That's wonderful. You tell her that I admire what she's doing, and I know that it has strong effects.
So proud. I'm so proud of her. I just can't say it enough. I'm so proud of what she does. I have two nieces that both work in the military. One served active duty, and she's still serving, no longer active duty, but still serving in the military. So I'm very proud of my nieces for, carrying on the family tradition of the military life and what that's all about. So yeah, we're a big military family, you can tell.
Well,
Yeah, so kudos to you for continuing to tell these stories. I would encourage you to, as an editor for Fine Lines, I would encourage you to submit your poetry and short stories to finelines.org. It certainly is open to hearing these stories and sharing these stories with the world.
Well, I'm very well, and it's called Fine Line.
Finelines.org, FINELINES.org. Just go onto the website.
I may pull a couple of those out and send that because
That would be wonderful. I'm sure that
none of them
they will be
published.
well received.
Yeah, I didn't send them to journals because I don't really trust literary journals with material like that. There are too many of the editors are undergraduate or graduate students that have a very, what do I say, a worldview contrary to mine. So you bump up against that. But that's wonderful that your niece is doing that. I have a former student female, who was injured in a bomb blast in Afghanistan. Well, during the Afghan period of the war over there, and she just recently they finally awarded her Purple Heart. She had to fight for it, but she does the same thing. But she's not getting paid for it. She's deeply involved in military organizations that are helping veterans and a lot. She helped get airplane flights for they were doing it for a while for veterans and flying them to Washington D.C. to the memorial wall and things like that.
Right.
She's a wonderful human being, and what can you say? She's still in touch with me, and I'm in touch with her, and she even remembers me being kind of funny in the classroom, and I thought my jokes always flopped.
Well,
So,
Lee, it's been a pleasure to have you on here today. Do you
thank you.
have anything else you'd like to share before we go?
Just your readership out there, your audience and everything. Just keep reading books, and we've got it's a tough world for writers right now in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of mid-list literary writers and poets and people like that who need support and encouragement for their work. And one of the best ways to be encouraged is to see that people are buying your work. So I guess that's a terrible thing. That's my suggestion.
Buy the book, review the book, support one another, and share that information. Absolutely, 100% agree with that idea.
That's the best I can leave them with. And thank you so very much for having me on.
Thank you, Lee.
I wish we'd had a video connection, but because I know that you want to see my glaring bald head.
Well, perhaps the next time we'll be successful in doing that.
Okay.
When your next book comes out, just reach out.
Maybe when At the VA is out, we'll have a talk again.
Absolutely. You're certainly welcome to come back.
Thank you. And
thank you, Lee. Best wishes with your book.
Yeah, you keep up the good work that you're doing for writers.
Thank you.